Everyday life has been altered due to COVID 19 now. But do you know there are even more deadly pandemics that humanity has experienced before? Without any delay, let's start today's episode. Hello, aspiring Sarvagnanis. Welcome to my channel. Here's the list of top 15 deadliest pandemics ever. Number 15, Great Plague of London. In 1665 and 1666, London city experienced two enormous tragedies: Great Plague of London and Great Fire of London. Great Plague was the last major epidemic of the bubonic plague that occurred in Europe. Bubonic plague is one of the three types of plague caused by bacterium Yersinia pestis, which is usually transmitted through the bite of an infected black rat flea. In 2016, DNA testing has confirmed the identity of the bacteria. The other two types of plagues are septicemic plague and pneumonic plague. The symptoms of bubonic plague include fever, headache, and vomiting. At that time, doctors and people aren't aware of the cause. They thought the disease is caused by impure air and tried to cleanse it with heat and smoke. Some people got rid of their cats and dogs instead of rats, which helped in the growth of rats further. The disease spread so fast and killed nearly 100,000 people in a span of 18 months, which is roughly 1/4 of London population at that time. Rich people including King Charles II, doctors, lawyers, and merchants fled the city and moved to Oxford. Even the parliament and courts were temporarily moved to other cities. The authorities took some extreme measures to shut down the sick people and bury the dead, which proved to be effective in eradicating this disease finally. Number 14, Yellow Fever. During the 18th and 19th centuries, there were major outbreaks of yellow fever in parts of America and African continents. The virus was spread through female mosquitoes, and it is believed that both the virus and the vector were transmitted to the Western world and Americas through slave trading from Africa. The symptoms include fever, chills, loss of appetite, nausea, muscle pains, particularly in the back, and headaches. The first major outbreak occurred in Philadelphia, then capital of USA, in 1793, killing roughly around 10% of the population. President George Washington and Secretary of State Thomas Jefferson fled away from the state and settled in Washington, which then became the capital. Over the next few decades, the yellow fever killed many people in Haiti, Georgia, Louisiana, Virginia, Bermuda, Texas, Mississippi, and France. It was estimated that nearly 150,000 people died during these series of outbreaks throughout the world. Several studies in the late 1800s and early 1900s convinced the scientific community that the disease is spread through mosquitoes. Strict mosquito control measures using improved sanitation, fumigation with insecticides, and reduction in standing water areas where mosquitoes breed helped in the eradication of this deadly disease. Number 13, Swine Flu. This is a more recent deadly disease known to mankind. Swine flu is caused by H1N1 pdm09 virus. This is the second H1N1 virus that the world has seen, the first being the 1918 Spanish flu, which we will be discussing later. Symptoms include fever, cough, headache, body aches, sore throat, chills, fatigue, and runny nose. It was first detected in the United States and quickly spread throughout the world, killing anywhere between 151,700 to 575,400 people in the first year of the pandemic, according to Centers for Disease Protection and Control (CDC). Around 80% of the deaths occurred in younger people less than 65 years of age. One-third of the population over 60 years of age had antibodies against this virus, likely from the exposure to the old H1N1 virus. On June 11, 2009, World Health Organization declared swine flu as pandemic. The virus spread to many other countries and the rate of hospitalizations increased. After extensive research, the US began administering a newly approved vaccine for H1N1 on October 5, 2009. The second wave of 2009 H1N1 activity hit the US in the fall, with activity peaking during the second week in October. After that, activity declined quickly to below baseline levels in January. The activity further declined in the following months. Finally, WHO declared an end to the pandemic on August 10, 2010. Number 12. COVID-19. The ongoing pandemic with around 6 million confirmed cases is next in the list. It is caused by severe acute respiratory syndrome coronavirus 2. It was first identified in Wuhan province in China in December 2019 and soon spread to almost every nation in the world. The United States is the most affected nation due to this virus, currently with more than 1.78 million confirmed cases and 104,000 deaths. Common symptoms include fever, cough, fatigue, shortness of breath, and loss of smell. Complications may include pneumonia and acute respiratory distress syndrome. New temporary hospitals were set up in many countries as the rate of hospitalization has increased due to the sudden outbreak. On March 11, 2020, World Health Organization has recognized the spread of COVID-19 as a pandemic. There is currently no cure or vaccine for the disease. The only way to mitigate the spread of this disease is to follow preventive measures that include hand washing, surface cleaning, using face masks, and following respiratory hygiene, social distancing, and self-isolation. Global economy is destabilized due to the virus. Major industries that have been impacted with this virus are airlines, cruise, tourism, and oil and energy. Hopefully there will be a cure soon and people can get back to their routine. And I wish this doesn't grow up in this list in future. Number 11. Hong Kong flu. The 1968 Hong Kong flu pandemic was initiated through a new form of virus known as H3N2. It is believed that the 1957 pandemic flu virus H2N2 was mutated to form into this new form of virus. The first cases were identified in Hong Kong in 1968 and quickly spread to Vietnam, Singapore, India, Philippines, Australia, Europe, United States, Japan, Africa, and South America. The symptoms are similar to that of influenza and caused upper respiratory problems, chills, fever, muscle pain, and weakness. In North America, the first wave of infection killed many people, whereas in Europe and Asia, the second wave of infection was 2 to 3 times more deadly than the first wave. Even though it spreads really fast and infected many people globally, the death rate was surprisingly less compared to other flu pandemics that you see next in this list. Researchers believe the antibodies that were developed in people from 1957 Asian flu virus H2N2 helped people to recover from this new virus. A vaccine was developed after the pandemic has peaked in most of the countries. Number 10. Russian flu. With the invention of railways and faster steam ships, the 1889 flu, which was originated in Russia, is the first global pandemic which spread to many countries across continents. It is believed that influenza A subtype H3, possibly the H3N8 subtype, is a more likely cause for the 1889-1890 pandemic. In the initial days when the mortality rate is going high in Russia and parts of Europe, the health workers in the other countries downplayed the virus, but it soon spread to many countries in the northern hemisphere. The symptoms were similar to that of common cold, but this proved to be more deadly by killing about 1 million worldwide. Number 9. Italian Plague. The Italian Plague, which is also referred as the Great Plague of Milan, was considered one of the later outbreaks of the centuries-long bubonic plague pandemic, which started with the Black Death. The troops from the 30 Years' War carried the infection into the Italian city of Mantua in 1629, and it later spread to the other parts of the country, including Milan. The virus quickly spread to other countries in Europe, killing around 1 million people. The symptoms were similar to that of the other bubonic plague of London that was explained earlier. Strict quarantine measures of the infected people and isolating the suspected carriers of the disease to the nearby islands helped them to prevent the spread of infection. Number 8. Asian flu. A new influenza H2N2 virus was emerged in East Asia and subsequently spread to many nations in the world. The first cases were reported in China, Hong Kong, and Singapore in February 1957. The virus then spread to Taiwan, India, United Kingdom, and the United States by the later part of the year. Some infected people experienced only cough and mild fever, whereas some others experienced more life-threatening symptoms such as pneumonia. The second wave of infection is believed to have more mortality rate than the first wave, especially pregnant women, the elderly, and the ones with pre-existing lung and heart diseases. It is believed that the infected people may be as many or more than the number of people infected during 1918 Spanish flu, but the relatively lower mortality rate can be contributed to the vaccine, improved healthcare, and the invention of antibiotics. Number 7. Antonine Plague. Antonine Plague, which started in Greece in 165 AD, is the oldest pandemic in our list. It is also known as Plague of Galen, named after Greek physician Galen. Galen not only witnessed the disease but explained the symptoms and the course of the disease. More common symptoms were fever, diarrhea, vomiting, thirstiness, swollen throat, coughing, and skin eruptions or rash. Most of the modern researchers diagnose the disease as smallpox based on the symptoms described. It was believed that the troops returning from Far East brought this disease to the Roman Empire. It spread rapidly throughout the Roman region and killed around 25% of its population. The total death count is estimated to be around 5 million. It was believed that the Roman Emperor Lucius Verus, who died in 169 AD, was killed by this disease. This pandemic, which followed by multiple outbreaks in future, was one of the reasons for the beginning of the decline of the Roman Empire in the West. Number 6. Third Plague. The Third Plague pandemic erupted in 1855 in the Chinese province of Yunnan. It soon spread into all 6 inhabited continents and killed around 15 million people. Around 12 million deaths were in China and India alone. The first 2 plagues were even more deadly and will be discussed later in our list. Just like other plagues in our list, it was caused by Bacillus Yersinia pestis and spread through rat fleas. The symptoms were similar to that of other bubonic plagues discussed earlier. In 1894, a Hong Kong physician, Alexander Yersin, identified the Bacillus Yersinia pestis as the cause of this pandemic. Later, another physician finally confirmed that bites from rat fleas were the main way the infection spread to humans. This pandemic was considered active until 1960, according to the World Health Organization, until the worldwide casualties dropped to 200 per year. Number 5. HIV/AIDS. In 1981, the first cases of patients with HIV, human immunodeficiency virus, were reported in the United States. It soon spread to all parts of the world. Researchers believe that the virus spread from chimpanzees to the humans. The virus attacks the immunity system by destroying the white blood cells and makes the body not respond to other disease-causing foreign objects. Even though the spread of the disease was controlled by a number of awareness programs, it still spread in parts of sub-Saharan Africa at a greater pace. Symptoms vary based on the phase of the infection and also the new infections that could be caused with lack of immunity. But the most common symptoms include fever, chills, headache, diarrhea, weight loss, and weakness. Currently, there is no cure for HIV/AIDS. Preventive measures include having safe sex and using unused sterilized needles and injecting equipment. Even though there is no cure, there are few medications known as antiretroviral therapy that can control HIV and prevent complications from it. 1st December of every year since 1988 was dedicated as World AIDS Day by WHO to raise awareness of the spread of the HIV infection and to mourn for the deaths of the people from this disease. Number 4. Plague of Justinian. This is the first of the 3 bubonic plagues that we discussed earlier in this video. This pandemic, which is believed to be originated in Africa, reached Europe through infected rats on merchant ships. This pandemic that has affected almost half of the Europe population was named after Justinian I, then Emperor of Byzantine. The emperor himself was infected with this disease but survived. The symptoms were similar to the other bubonic plagues, but Procopius in his book Secret History describes victims additionally suffered from delusions, nightmares and coma. At the peak of the pandemic, researchers believe that the death toll was 5,000 to 10,000 people per day. This disease continued as small outbreaks for the next few centuries until 750 AD, with approximate death toll of 30 to 50 million. This plague contributed to a weakening of the Byzantine Empire in political and economic ways and was one of the reasons of foreign invasions in the next few decades. Number 3. New World Smallpox. Smallpox is a horrific and highly contagious disease that is caused by variola virus. It arrived in the New World on a ship that landed on Hispaniola. The people that were residing there had no immunity and were rapidly devastated by the disease. Initial symptoms include high fevers, vomiting, headache, and severe abdominal and back pain. A few days later, rashes start on the face and hands and then rapidly spread to cover the body. This disease had a mortality rate of 30 to 35% and has several serious complications including scarring, blindness, and limb deformities. It has been estimated that the population of Mexico dropped to 1.5 to 3 million by 1568 from over 30 million before this disease started over there in 1520. It was believed that 90% of the population of the New World was killed by this virus. This major pandemic was responsible for the conquest of Mexico. Number 2. Spanish flu. By the end of World War I in 1918, a new deadly pandemic caused by H1N1 influenza A virus began. The source of the origin of the virus is not known, but theories point to France, China, Britain, or the United States where the first cases were reported. Some believe the infected soldiers spread the disease to other military camps throughout the world. In the next few months, around 500 million people, 1/3 of the world population at the time, were infected with this virus. The total death toll is estimated to be around 50 million, making it the worst pandemic in the recent history. Even though the flu was first observed in Europe, Americas, and parts of Asia, it was known as Spanish flu, as Spanish newspapers were free to report this disease, unlike the media in all the other countries where the government imposed wartime censorship. The first wave of 1918 pandemic was generally mild, and the patients experienced typical flu symptoms as chills, fever, and fatigue. However, the second wave was more deadlier and the victims died within hours or days of developing more complicated symptoms, where their skin turned blue and their lungs filled with fluids that caused suffocation. Unlike the previous pandemics, the mortality rate was higher even in healthy groups, including people aged between 20 to 40 years. With no vaccine against this influenza virus and no antibiotics to treat secondary bacterial infections, non-pharmaceutical interventions such as isolation, quarantine, good personal hygiene, use of disinfectants, and limitations of public gatherings were used to control the spread of this disease worldwide. By mid-1919, the flu pandemic came to an end as those that were infected either died or developed immunity. Some researchers believe that the virus mutated extremely rapidly to a less lethal strain. Number 1. Black Death. The deadliest pandemic ever was caused by the bacterium Yersinia pestis. The Black Death, also known as the pestilence and the plague, was the second bubonic plague. The disease most likely originated in the Central or Eastern Asia and traveled across Eurasia and North Africa from 1347 to 1352, killing around 75 to 200 million people. It was believed that this plague reduced the world population from 475 million to 350 to 375 million in the 14th century, killing approximately 30 to 60% of Europe population at that time. Just like the other plagues in this list, this disease was spread by the bacteria that was carried by the fleas living on the black rats through the merchant ships. Once the disease reached onshore, the Black Death was mostly spread through human fleas and person-to-person contact via aerosols. This was the reason for the rapid spread of the disease in Europe. Symptoms include high fever, headache, joint aches, nausea and vomiting. The Italian poet Boccaccio described about people having swellings either on the groin or under the armpits, some reaching as big as common apples and some others as big as the size of an egg. When left untreated, 80% of people die within 8 days after contracting this bubonic plague. To reduce the spread of this disease, the sailors were kept in isolation in their ships for 30 to 40 days. This was the first known practice of quarantine, which we still use to reduce the spread of deadly pandemics. Modern sanitation and public health practices have greatly reduced the spread of the plagues. Even though antibiotics are widely available now, according to the World Health Organization, there are still 1,000 to 3,000 cases of plague every year. And now, fact of the day. The seventh wave of cholera pandemic, which started in 1961, is still ongoing and is considered as the world's longest running pandemic, according to the World Health Organization. There were 6 waves of cholera pandemics before that from 1817 to 1923.